Hello and welcome to Wenll's Guide to Talents in MOP 5.2. So I'm going to go over the basics of the talent system for MOP in 5.2, obviously. Give you some pointers on which ones to pick depending on what you're doing, raiding, PvP, soloing, whatever. So you still have the two primary and secondary specialization that you can pick, and your talents will be saved to each tree or each spec depending on which one you do. But now basically how it works is the talent trees where they used to be, basically like you had a whole tree, you could go down and you have like 3 different trees that would give you like marksman, survival, all that stuff. Now all that's removed. Basically the talents work in a way that for the most part they don't really give you a damage increase. It's more of a the talents are designed more to be utility based. Same with the glyphs for the most part. So it's more about picking what would be good utility wise depending on the situation. And you've still got 3 columns, but you can, and then you've got 6 tiers or rows, but you can pick one talent per tier, so you're no longer limited to picking like all of them in one column and then having to go to the next column. Yeah, you can actually like pick any of them you want from each column. So basically let's get to it. Oh, and also basically like what happens now if you pick a talent that you decide you either don't want anymore or you need to swap it out depending on the fight, you can just either click on the talent or in the talent thing and it'll say, do you want to clear this talent tree, and then you just click yes, and it just costs 1 tome of the clear mine, and you could get those pretty much anywhere. Like if someone's got a mammoth, usually the mammoths will actually have it on the mammoth vendor. You can see right here, tome of the clear mine. I usually keep a stack with me as well, so I can just do it on the fly. But you can just do that and you'll clear that row, and then you can pick whatever talent you want. So basically so for the first tier you basically have post haste, which makes it so when you disengage you run faster for 8 seconds. The second option is narrow escape, which will web targets within 8 yards in place for 8 seconds every time you disengage. And the third option is crouch tiger hidden chimera, which reduces the cooldown on disengage by 10 seconds, and deterrence it'll reduce it down to 1 minute. But yeah, so you've got those 3 things. Narrow escape's really only useful against melee and PvP. Post haste is nice, but for the most part you're not going to be in a lot of situations where it's actually that useful. In a PvP situation it'll help against melee a little bit and to run around faster, but really it's not going to help that much. And basically crouching tiger hidden dragon, or chimera rather, what I like about it is you can basically disengage every 15 seconds using that, and it'll also allow you to deterrence every minute, which when you combine that with this one glyph, it'll actually like allow you to heal for a little bit every 15 seconds. So this one, I find crouching tiger hidden chimera is probably the best one to use in most circumstances, because you basically get 2 disengages in the time it would take you to do a normal disengage, and then you also have that 1 minute instead of 2 minute deterrence. So definitely in PvE, and in PvP it's probably the best as well. Narrow escape's really only for melee though. It's not that good against anything else other than melee. For the tier 2 talents, you've got Silencing Shot, which is now on a 24-second cooldown, Wyvern Sting, and Binding Shot. Wyvern Sting can be useful in arenas for some slight CC, but that's probably it. It just puts the target to sleep for 30 seconds on a 45-second cooldown. And I think in PvP it actually does it for like 8 seconds, so it's really not that useful. Yeah, I mean, it would be useful for like a small CC, that'd probably be about it. Binding Shot, that one you actually have, it works kind of like the trap launcher, where you run around and do, like you would put a trap like that. It works the same way. You just click on it and then click on the ground, and it'll be a larger radius than the trap. It'll be a 5-yard radius instead of the small radius this one is. And anything within that 5 yards gets bound to that little area, and if they move away from it, they'll be stunned for a few seconds. Silencing Shot, even though they did increase the cooldown, it's probably going to be your go-to talent in this tier, just because PvE pretty much mandatory. You gotta have interrupts. The other two are pretty much useless in PvE. Soloing, you're gonna want to have Silencing Shot for soloing, so you can interrupt casters or whatever. And PvP, it's probably going to be your PvP talent as well, just because there's caster. It's pretty much the only way you can counter casters, and then definitely against healers and healer comms, so pretty much mandatory one. Honestly, I wish they'd actually just make it baseline and replace it with intimidation in this slot. Yeah, because that would probably make the most sense instead of having BM have intimidation. So who knows? Maybe in the future. For the third tier is really the only one where it's very situational. Basically, anytime you have anyone healing you, you're going to want Aspect of the Iron Hawk. Any other time, you're probably going to want Spirit Bond. Basically, what the talents do is Exhilaration heals you for 30% of your health, and your pet for 100% of their health, and it's on a 2-minute cooldown. Iron Hawk will reduce the amount of damage you take by 15%, which can actually be quite a lot of damage, so that's far more than you're going to be able to self-heal with Exhilaration or Spirit Bond. So if you have a healer, definitely use Aspect of the Iron Hawk, which pretty much PvE, raiding groups, PvP where you have a healer. So yeah. Spirit Bond, what that one does is it's a passive ability that lets you regen 2% of your HP every 2 seconds while your pet is active. So easier way to think of it is you heal 1% every second. The reason I do not like Exhilaration and I like Spirit Bond a lot more is basically, if you think about it like this, Spirit Bond will heal you for 30% of your health, which is what Exhilaration does, over the course of 30 seconds. So in 1/4 the cooldown time, it'll heal for the same amount of Exhilaration. In 2 minutes, it'll heal you for 120% of your health, whereas in 2 minutes, Exhilaration only heals you that 30%. And then you gotta wait another 2 minutes to heal another 30%. So Spirit Bond, and that's another thing, is Spirit Bond is constantly passively healing you as you're taking damage. So you are constantly being healed with Spirit Bond. So you're going to get a lot more healing out of Spirit Bond than you will with Exhilaration. And And honestly, if you're at the point where exhilaration is just you feel like you need that 30%, you're probably going to die. If you can't last that 30 seconds or whatever, then maybe not every time, but it's a probably good possibility you'll probably end up dying. So as long as you can manage to survive for at least 30 seconds, then you'll have gotten at minimum exhilaration, self-healing, and if you last longer than that, you'll have gotten even more. So Spirit Bond definitely for extreme soloing. I personally prefer for soloing, PvP, all that. Any place where I don't have a healer myself. Exhilaration, probably the only place I would see exhilaration being useful is if you had exhilaration in combination with the BM's Spirit Mend, if they have a Spirit Beast. That'd probably be the only way I could see that being semi-useful. And even then, I'd still prefer Spirit Bond, just because as long as you can stay alive that 30 seconds, you've already healed the amount of exhilaration. And you don't have to worry about looking at your health going, oh, am I 30% exactly yet, and blah, blah, so, yeah. But that pretty much is the only tree where, for the most part, your talents are going to probably differ, depending on what you're doing. I find everything else I do, all my talents generally stay the same. For the fourth tier, yeah, so basically for the fourth tier, it's kind of a personal preference. Most people tend to go with Dire Beast. I think that's the current hunter standard, is Dire Beast gives you the most focus back. For PvE, PvP, all those situations, but it's kind of situational. Basically, if you're doing, okay, basically you've got Fervor, which gives you 50 focus back automatically, and another 50 over 10 seconds. And it's on a 30-second cooldown. That can be very good if you need to do burst. So primarily, like if you're in a PvP situation, and I know if you've ever been in a PvP situation, you're in that situation where you use all your cooldowns, burst someone down all the way, and then you get them low, but then you're out of focus, so then you have to use steady shot or whatever to get your focus back, and by then they've started healing. So this will allow you to just instantly get a bunch of focus back, and that way you burst them down, and then, oh look, I've got even more focus, so you can burst them down that final bit. So that can actually be pretty useful in certain PvP situations. Dire Beast, what Dire Beast does is it's on a 30-second cooldown as well, and it'll attack the target for 15 seconds, and each time it attacks, it gives you 5 focus. It is affected, it does do a bit of melee damage, not that much, and it is affected by heroism, so if you use that, it will, and especially like in a raid or something and someone casts hero, you will actually get a little bit more damage and focus out of the Dire Beast while hero is going off. But it's pretty much a constant, steady, passive, well, not really passive because you have to actually cast it, but it's a constant, steady stream of focus that you're getting. Thrill of the Hunt is, I actually kind of like it, but apparently, I guess Dire Beast is pretty much technically will give you more focus back, but Thrill of the Hunt can be very useful as well. It basically has a 30% chance when you fire attack or whatever that costs focus to basically make it so your next 3 arcane shots or multi shots are reduced by 20 focus. It procs a lot, so it can be very useful if you're doing whatever. It can definitely be very useful if you need a lot of procs and a lot of lowered focus on like arcane shot or whatever. So like if you're doing orbs on Elgon, maybe it can definitely be useful for that. Um, yeah, I mean it's pretty useful. The only downside is it does rely on procs, so you're going to you're still relying on RNG, but it does proc a lot. So if you like, you can use that one. Really, all three of them are really good, but I believe Dire Beast is pretty much the industry standard. So, Murder of Crows for the fifth talent tree or tier is also pretty much industry standard. Pretty much for this one, you got Murder of Crows, costs 60 focus, so it does cost focus, but you need to make sure you have in order to cast it. And it'll put a dot of crows on the target for 30 seconds. If the target's under 20% health, it'll actually, instead of being on a 2-minute cooldown, it'll be on a 1-minute cooldown as well, which usually, for the most part, most bosses is like when they're 20% or lower, they usually last maybe a minute, if that. So that part's usually not that big a deal, but it does the most damage out of the three for its cost, apparently. It's kind of cool because if you have it, it'll put a bunch of crows around the target. It's not affected by any haste effects whatsoever, so heroism won't affect it, rapid fire won't affect it, none of that will affect it. But it just does that constant damage, and apparently it actually does quite a bit of damage. So Blink Strike is 20-second cooldown, instant strike. That one's probably more useful in PvP, especially if you're BM. It'll just instantly teleport your pet behind the target and make it do 600% damage. So that one can be pretty useful in PvP. Link's Rush can be useful against single target or multiple targets. Basically just 1.5 minute cooldown, attacks 9 aims, multiple targets or single target, and just cause your pet to leap all around, attacking it viciously. That one's I've seen some punters take it for PvE purposes. I've seen some take it for PvP, but pretty much for this tier, Murder of Crows is kind of the industry standard. If you picked one of the other two, it probably shouldn't be that big a deal, but just be aware. Here's what Murder of Crows looks like. So you can see there's a bunch of crows as well. And if the target does move, be aware that if the target moves, you'll see the crows actually fly after the target. So you can kind of see where the target's heading in PvP situations or whatever. And it could be kind of funny actually watching the crows chase them. The last tier, you've got Glaive Toss, Power Shot, Barrage. Glaive Toss is also pretty much an industry standard for hunters. Costs 15 focus, 15-second cooldown. You hurl 2 glaives at the target, like so. And basically any targets between you and that target will be hit. So like if I were to go over here with that target way over there targeted, and I were to shoot it, all 3 targets will be hit. See, they're all hit, and then they're all hit again when it returns. So it's good for AoE for that purpose. Also does decent single target damage, so yeah. And it's also good in PvP and stuff like that because it'll slow the target by 30% as well for a few seconds. Power Shot, that one is, hunters like to have that in PvP, but that one's extremely hard to pull off because it has a longer cast time than the aim shot does, and if you move, it'll get interrupted. If the target like feign deaths or gets out of line of sight or something, you'll get interrupted. So that one is extremely easy to avoid. Also, if the enemy is moving, apparently they can avoid this damage if they're moving. So power shot is very it's very hard to pull off, but if you can pull it off, it can do a lot of damage. And basically it does the same thing Glaive Toss does, where it'll hit all the targets in between you and the whatever you're shooting, doing 800% weapon damage to the target, 400% to everything else, and it'll even knock the target back a little. So it's very hard to pull off, but if you manage to master it, it can be very devastating. Barrage, and that one's pretty much PvP only. You're really only going to probably use it in PvP, most likely. Barrage is kind of fun. Basically what happens is for that, you also can't move with that, but instead of waiting for the cast timer to finish, you're actually shooting during the cast timer. So you're shooting the target and doing a bunch of AoE damage around the target while the cast timer is going on, and then once the cast timer finishes, you'll be done with casting it. So it's kind of like I guess the, what do you call it, barrage or whatever that mages have, where they can just use their barrage and it'll keep shooting. Does 640% damage to the target and then 320% to everything else around it, but yeah. So basically, though, industry standard for this one is Glaive Toss. So basically, your talent choices are, for the most part, is going to be Crouching Tiger, Hidden Chimera, Silencing Shot, Dire Beast, Murder of Crows, Glaive Toss for everything. For PvE, for PvE like dungeons and raids, and if you're doing PvP with a healing partner, Aspect of the Ironhawk. Anything without a healer though, you will want Spirit Bond. So if you're doing PvP without a healer, if you're soloing, Extreme Hunter soloing, definitely Spirit Bond. And I think that's pretty much it. So you can kind of go through these talents and kind of like not choose the industry standards, depending on what the situation is, but for the most part, this pretty much is the industry standard. You're really only switching Aspect of the Ironhawk and Spirit Bond depending on what you're doing. Everything else is pretty much the same usually. But I mean, if something else works for you better, if you find something else works for you better, then by all means go for it. Blizzard tried to make them actually pretty good. The one thing I will say though is, by having Dire Beast, Murder Crows, and Glaive Toss, you have a 15-second, 30-second, and 2-minute cooldown. So what I like to do is I actually like to have them on a macro, because they actually line up perfectly, where you have Glaive Toss. Every 2 Glaive Toss, you'll then be able to cast Dire Beast. Every 4 Glaive Toss, and you'll be able to cast Dire Beast again, obviously, and a Murder of Crows. So they actually line up very well. So you can just have them all in one neat little macro like I've got right there. And then I've got them all up here as well, just in case. But I'll go over that later in a different guide. Macros and such. So, but anyways, so I hope you found this guide helpful, and thanks for watching.